Having a good beginning is critical to getting readers immersed into the world of your story. In this video, I'm going to share with you my advice and personal opinions on how to write a good first sentence. In writing books that I've read and in courses that I've taken, there's this pressure put on first sentences, like having a first sentence is the most important part of your book, and the first sentence is the most important sentence in your book. And I think that it's really important to reject that pressure at the beginning stages of the process. When you're first starting to write your first draft, don't worry about your first sentence. Don't bog yourself down with worrying about your first sentence having to be the most catchy thing on earth, having it be super hooky, having it really capture people's attention. Just start your story somewhere, even if it's with an alarm going off in the morning or your character just rolling out of bed. Only when you're finished with at least one full draft of the story, then you can go back and revisit your first sentence. But in my opinion, the first sentence is not something that should really be grappled with until you know what your story is about and know what you're trying to say with your story. You want to know what your theme is, and you want to know what your story is trying to say through that theme or about that theme. And all of that information only comes to me after I've written a full draft. But after you already know all this stuff and you have a first draft and you're revising and working on draft 2, that's when you can start thinking about a first sentence. Before we dive into talking about first sentences, hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos on this channel sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of the They Stay series, including books They Stay, They Whisper, They Return, They Hunt, and book 5, which I'm working on right now. It is about ghosts and teens trying to solve this creepy mystery happening in a small town. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check it out. And yeah, like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's just dive into it. The best first sentences do 4 things. First, they pose questions. Every great first sentence has an element of mystery in it. It poses a question that it does not answer that is burning enough that it makes readers want to know the answer. By mentioning something very peculiar, by mentioning a character that sounds kind of interesting, by mentioning an event that sounds really bizarre, it introduces an element of mystery. And no matter what genre you're writing in, people can't resist a little bit of mystery. You want this burning question to be compelling enough that readers just have to know the answer, to scratch the itch in their brain. The second thing that you can have your first sentence be is shocking. This doesn't work in all cases, but in the right context, this works extremely well. Images that are shocking or surprising in some way capture people's imaginations. Things that they don't expect people to say. Things that they don't know exist or wouldn't expect to ever see. Having something specific that is also surprising or shocking is a great way to capture people's imaginations and have them want to know more about what is happening in your story that could have created such a strange sentence. The third thing your first sentence must do is that it must set the tone and or voice of your story. If your book is narrated by a very conversational narrator, you want your first sentence to be very conversational. If your main character is very serious and not light and bubbly, you don't want your first sentence to be light and bubbly. So your first sentence needs to fit in the voice of your main character or narrator of your story. And 4, your first sentence should establish your genre. A first sentence talking about a strange place where your character found a dead body is not necessarily going to belong in a rom-com. Having a dead body mentioned in the first sentence indicates that your story is probably a thriller or a mystery. Likewise, if you're writing a thriller, you probably don't want your first sentence to be talking about the cute boy that the girl saw at the grocery store that day, unless there's a much more menacing tone to it. Ideally, your readers will know from reading the first sentence of your book what kind of book they're getting into and what genre it fits into. So those 4 things are the general 4 goals I like to keep in mind for my first sentences. I don't hit all of these things in every first sentence I write, and I know a lot of first sentences that are very good that also don't hit all of these things. But I try to do as many of those things as possible. Those are my goals when I'm writing my first sentences. So because I love YA books, I'm going to give you 3 examples of first sentences from YA books that I absolutely love. The first one is from the book The Raven Boys. Blue Sargent had forgotten how many times she'd been told that she would kill her true love. This is an absolutely amazing first sentence. Hearing that this girl had heard many times that she would kill her true love is very shocking. This first sentence also raises a lot of questions, like who told Blue this? That's not a normal thing to tell somebody else. That's also not a normal thing to just know. It raises a question of whether this is paranormal, and it also suggests that Blue will be put in a position where she will have to kill her true love sometime over the course of this story. It's clearly important enough to make the first sentence, and so people want to know not only who this person is that she loves, but also how this whole thing is going to go down right from the very first sentence. It suggests that there is a love story because it says her true love in the first sentence, but you also get that it's going to be dark because they use the word kill. So this sentence is extremely effective. Another sentence that's really effective is the opening sentence of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. I had just come to accept that my life would be ordinary when extraordinary things began to happen. While this opening line isn't incredibly specific, the use of the word extraordinary piques your curiosity. What things are extraordinary? What constitutes as an extraordinary thing? That poses a question that sparks curiosity. It sets up the voice and tone of the story as a sort of whimsical narrator, a little bit peculiar. It may not necessarily be shocking or establish genre, but it definitely asks a big question at the beginning that makes you want to know what this extraordinary thing is going to be. Another example of a good opening sentence in a YA book is the opening sentence of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. This is not necessarily a shocking image, but it does invoke some questions and spark some curiosity. Why is the bed cold? Is it not normally cold? Who is the narrator? Do they usually sleep with somebody else? While this first sentence by itself does not necessarily indicate that this book is about other kids killing each other, and it does not reflect the gore that is to come in the book, it does do a good job at establishing voice and establishing the general tone of the story, that this is kind of cold and bleak and lonely at the beginning of the story. It's not a happy princess lovey-dovey world. It's a pretty bleak, sad world. So now I'm going to share the first sentences of the first 3 books in my series and talk a little bit about why I created them and my thought process as I chose these first sentences as the first sentences of these books. So my series is a paranormal ghost thriller. It has elements of horror. It is pretty creepy and it gets kind of dark and there are mysterious elements to it. So the vibe is Stranger Things with ghosts. The first line of They Stay is, if Max doesn't put on his shirt right now, I'm gonna kill him. The questions that I wanted that to invoke are like, who is Max? Why does the speaker want to kill him? Why would someone want to kill anybody if they didn't put on their shirt? But it's pretty clear, even in the first sentence, that the speaker probably isn't going to kill someone for not putting on their shirt. This is the same usage as like, if you eat my ice cream that I saved for myself for later, I'm gonna kill you. It's not a serious death threat. It's like a thing people use in everyday speech. But it is still the word kill, and I wanted to work that into the first sentence of this book because even though the main character who's speaking, who is Shiloh, who's Max's 16-year-old sister, and Max is just her entire world, she loves him more than anything in the world. She would never do anything to hurt him, and the entire book is pretty much her trying to save him and protect him from this horrible thing that is going to happen with ghosts. There are a lot of things that do actually want to kill Max in this book, and it's up to Shiloh to save him from those things. So I wanted to use the word kill because that suggests that it is a darker book instead of a more lighthearted sibling contemporary. I wanted to set the voice because that is a very casual, teenagey way of talking to your sibling. Like, if you don't do this, I'm gonna kill you, or if you do this, I'm gonna kill you. It's very informal, and the main character, Shiloh, is very informal. And I think that image is shocking enough that it captures people's attention. So to me, this kind of hit every single nail on the head when it comes to those 4 things that I look for when writing my first sentences. Which brings me to the first sentence of the second book in the series, which does something that a lot of people say is a automatic no-no when writing first sentences, which is that it's a line of dialogue. Quite a few people frown on using dialogue as the first sentence of a novel, but I really like this line of dialogue that I chose to be They Whisper's first line. It's very simple. Can we keep the lights on? They Whisper gets creepier than They Stay. It takes the action to the next level. There are more elements of horror and creepy stuff that is happening, and because it takes it to the next level, It reminded me of watching scary movies, and when you watch scary movies, you want to keep the lights on. So while this image wasn't shocking and it didn't really pose any questions for the reader, they weren't asking or wanted to know more about anything, like this is a pretty straightforward sentence, it did set up the genre, and I felt captured the tone of this story really well. And They Whisper was also a sequel, so this wasn't the first book in the series, and so I felt as though I could get away with doing that, whereas in They Stay, I wanted to make sure that I had the strongest first sentence that hit all of the marks as I could. And the first sentence of the third book in the series, They Return, is, "Coming to the hospital was supposed to make me feel better, but I feel like a corpse." So this first sentence doesn't pose major questions for the reader either. It doesn't necessarily spark curiosity. Maybe they're wondering what exactly is wrong with this character to make them end up in the hospital, but they have a pretty good idea of what happened to them at the end of They Whisper. The use of the word corpse is a bit shocking, so maybe that could count to check that box. But I was very purposeful in my inclusion of the word corpse because this book dives even farther into the horror elements of the series. It's probably the most horror-based book out of all of the books in the series so far, and it gets really gory and involves the villain bringing people back to life and bringing corpses back to life and reanimating bodies. And so I wanted to use the word corpse as a way to signal that this was going to get gory and kind of creepy and gross at some parts of the book, and ground that by, like, even in the first sentence. This character could have just said, like, "and I feel like crap," but I wanted to use the word corpse to signal the genre and signal the tone of the story, and do a little bit of foreshadowing into what's going to happen later in the book. So it might pose a couple of questions. It is pretty shocking, and I like the way that this establishes the tone and the voice. So that's why I chose the sentence, and that's how I thought about creating it. In both They Return and They Stay, I had words that I wanted to include. Like, I wanted to include corpse and I wanted to include kill. So that's kind of how I worked backwards from that. So there you have it. That's how I like to think about first sentences when I'm writing my stories. You don't have to have a killer first sentence in order to have a really great story. Your first sentence can just be very simple, and as long as it gets people into the story effectively, then you don't need to make it crazy and creative. You don't want to make it sound like you're trying too hard just for the sake of having a killer first line. You want it to be natural, and if it doesn't come naturally, don't stress about it. It's better to be simple and focus on being immersive than it is to be overly complicated, because that can also alienate readers. You also need to consider what works the best for your story. I write in the first person present tense point of view, and so I don't have the ability to write first sentences that see into the future. I can't use first sentences that are structured like, "On the day that my sister died, I started the day eating cereal," because my character at the beginning of the day wouldn't know that the sister dies at the end of the book, so I have to be a little more creative when thinking of ways to phrase that. So what you can do with a first sentence depends on your genre, and the examples that I used in this video are more tailored to books similar to the ones that I write. But that's what I do on this channel, is share what works for me and my personal experiences with writing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd be super grateful if you could like it and also subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, my name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos on this channel sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. Have you ever written a first sentence that you're really, really proud of? If so, drop it in the comments below. I would love to read it. Or if you're working on a story now and want some feedback on your first sentence, also drop it in the comments. I would be happy to give it a read. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy writing.